Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, and welcome to the Eddie Network podcast. I'm excited about our my guest today, Jennifer Davison, coming to meet with us. Jennifer is an American opera singer living in Vienna, Austria. She's involved with the with an arts and health movement, and but I've asked her to come on to talk about opera and its its experience and where it fits in our lives. And I would say for most of us, it doesn't fit in our lives because its form, its language, in many cases, it's too old. But I don't think it is. I really don't. I've grown to have an appreciation for it, even though I feel like I'm still at a very, very young stage of my understanding of opera. But I know what I like to hear. And whenever it comes on, where it shows up, say on YouTube, I'm saying I'm listening. It captures my attention, and it has the same sort of effect that poetry does. So one of the things I'm doing is I'm going to create a opera uh, playlist from people that I want to interview from the opera world. And much like my playlist, I want to um, provide a way for people who have no connection to opera have a way of understanding what it is, and maybe they go seek it out. Maybe if they go to go to New York or to Los Angeles or to Vienna, they would intentionally go to see a work of opera. So I welcome Jennifer to the show, and I know you're going to enjoy this. This is really great, and somewhere in this there will be some examples of the operas that we're talking about. So I wish you well and enjoy our conversation. And thank you for being here. Most famous thing from Macbeth was towards the end, it said, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty place, excuse me, creeps in this petty pace from day to day, to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. I mean, this is sort of some of the the depth of thought that goes into a lot of the operas that I've listened to recently. They're dealing with some of these issues of identity and time and purpose
Mm,
and relationship and the challenge of being a person and
mm,
which which is why I think we should be talking more about opera.
mhm. Yeah, that's amazing, and it's an incredible line. What is it doing for you? Why does that line from Macbeth? Why do you choose to
Well,
single that out?
if you look at the read it or watch the a film version or a stage version of it, what you get is this guy who has this great need to be important, and
Mm,
he becomes isolated and alienated by his desire to be important, and in order to be important, he must become destructive, and he kills
yeah,
the
yeah.
king, and he becomes the king, but he cannot be the king
Mm,
because he doesn't understand the nature of that time brings you to this and you cannot claim it. And I think that's a part
yeah,
of why some of these stories are so powerful is that they reveal sort of the depth of our character of being people who want to claim time and say, I'm the master of time. I've had so many people speak to me in different ways of saying this thing, but they basically say that we are the creators of our own reality, which is like saying I'm the creator of time. I get to decide what time means to me, and and therefore I am, you know, I'm sort of in a demigod role. I'm a god, but I'm
Mm,
not God. I can't be God. I don't have control. I don't have the power of creativity of
mm,
God. I don't have the power to change the world, even though I claim that I can. I mean, it's these sorts of things that,
mm,
um,
mm, mm,
so I've divided this out into three things. One is past, present, future. So I say that the past is really a question about generational memory. What do we remember from our past, and particularly the people that have been in our past, particularly our families? The second is that if past does not exist, and the future does not exist, which is part of I think what Eliot is pointing to, that
mm,
all we have is this eternal present, then we really don't have any knowledge of who we are. Because
mm,
what we know about ourselves is really something which has been captured in time. It's repeated.
mm,
There's a pattern that's repeated over and over again
mm,
about the things that we respond to and that sort of thing. And then the future is really about that we are driven to the future by the things that we desire. Maybe it's a desire for
mm,
significance or wealth or something, but that's what drives us into the future instead of, say, um, wanting to create the future generationally for through other people, into the future. So our legacy is not the legacy of what I accomplished, but the legacy is what we've accomplished through other people who have followed after us.
mm. Yeah, yeah.
So where this is
Very
going
cool.
is I'm writing a novel about this.
Fantastic. Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring Shakespeare in, and that I was just at this Shakespeare evening at the Globe
yeah,
where
that's why I mentioned
they
it.
were talking about, yeah, about this, it's this depth and these layers, right, of nuance that's why we can read these plays and these lines over and over again and see them in so many different ways because they are so rich. Um, and that's why it can be so powerful and transformative. And I was thinking exactly that this is also what opera does. Opera has this ability to hold all of these parts. I mean, not every opera, but as a whole, it has this ability to speak to all those layers. And I think a lot about the element of time travel,
Hmm.
as a classical musician,
Hmm.
because I, I'm singing music that is so old, all the time.
Yeah.
Um, and and connecting, therefore, with those spirits and souls of that time, and just feeling like they are my family, you know. And of course, they're carrying the spirits and souls of them before, And so that's one of the things when I think about, why the arts, what's one of the things you can do? I think you can travel through time, and every time you have the chance, especially in the time that we live in right now, where it's just, you know, all of this 24-hour news cycle and everything is about, the end of the world right now, but tomorrow it will be something else that's the end of the world. It's so exhausting, this constant, right now and tomorrow and the next thing and what's going to happen when. And then you go and you sit in a Shakespeare play and you hear all those same stories, just in a different version.
Yeah.
And you're like, wait a second, this was 500 years ago. And here we still are all, and what does that say about us and where we're going,
Right.
and what we're actually doing here? So it's all the things you're talking about.
It
Yeah,
is
and also the
really,
last time we talked,
well, I'm just saying it's really remarkable. I mean,
yeah.
and I feel like I have to play catch up. on history. Not so much history
Mm,
as something that's in a
mm,
book, but the history that is has been experienced by the people who were before us and who express that
mm,
history in the arts.
all encompassing. I think it's really everywhere. And I think it's kind of everything. It's this, as you say, it's experiential. It's the experience of life that you're getting, when you're being creative. It's when you are creating a story, your novel, right? That is like the deepest way you experience your life energy, right? Not every minute that you're writing, but that process.
It's
And I think that's why it's so profound and it's so hard to talk about because it's big and there's not words all the time for that.
as you're talking, this thought crossed my mind. It's because so if you have the arts here and you have the sciences here, and the sciences really are captured in the moment of research, and it's in many cases described in numbers and you know and in technical terms. But if you're to explain what this scientific thing is and its meaning, then you have to be able to have some kind of artistic capacity to express yourself in language that is beyond the science itself. And we don't really teach people. I mean, I'll give you an example. I was talking with a friend of mine who, until recently, worked at a university, and the university has, because they're in challenging times, have eliminated all their humanities majors and departments.
Hmm.
And I said to him, so basically, your school is now a glorified community college, technical school? Yeah, that's that's very short-sighted. It's very
Yeah,
short-sighted.
that's
And
right. Because I mean, all the really great scientists have also been artists. I mean, that's also throughout history. And because scientists need a lot of imagination,
yeah,
like the good ones. You have to imagine something, to be interested in it. And you have to imagine where it could go and what it could do. There's a lot of imagination in that when it works really well, right? And we have this moment where we've lost. I feel like there's so much of the loss of this understanding of how important imagination is, and everything's getting reduced, like you say, to the numbers, to the technology, to the, you know,
yeah.
and forgetting about this really big thing. And that's what the opera is. The opera is I was at a really cool event in Berlin this year. It was the annual meeting of the performance arts media space. So people making movies, films about opera films and ballet films and arts films and the arts broadcasters. PBS was there, Arte, they all meet once a year and do screenings and find out, what are they gonna put on their
Wow.
channels. And that was so cool to be in that space for the first time. And the keynote speaker, oh, sorry, the keynote speaker was Peter Gelt from the Met. And that was amazing, and he gave a very powerful speech. And the first thing he said, or one of the things he said was, opera is the art form that has the singular power to release the essence of humanity. I mean, the singular power to release the essence of humanity. And I was like, whoa, and I was like, why? Why is that? Like I would say yes. Why do I feel like that? And I think it's this thing of everything is involved, right? It's music, it's instruments, it's voices, it's
Emotion,
sets, it's lights, it's
emotion.
technology, like crazy. I mean, opera was the place to experience the latest thing that tech could do. That was at the opera until
What
the turn of the 20th century.
What motivated me to ask you to have this conversation about opera was watching um, the La Scala's production of Puccini's Turandot
Mm.
last year. And
Okay.
it was one of the most incredible things I've ever seen.
Mm.
And one of the things they had this, I don't know how they did, they had this big ball that hung over the stage. And it's sort of like the thing that the big dome that they have in Las Vegas now. So this thing was projecting all kinds of images that were fitting to the story as it was. And
Mm.
during the middle of the third act, everything stopped. And up on the ball was this picture of Puccini, and it was recognizing, I think it is the 100th anniversary of his death. And the
Mm.
moment that it is in the opera is the moment that he had died as he was writing the opera. And the rest of the opera was
Oh
just
my gosh, how cool.
something that someone had come along, one of his associates had come in to finish the opera. And it had this very powerful sense of this is not just a story that we're putting on stage. This is actually the representation of this man's life, and we honor this man for the genius that he was. And so there was this moment of quiet, and all the
Mm.
actors came out on stage, and they all had lights, and they were holding these lights up, and the people in the audience were holding lights up. They took the lights down, and they were holding. I mean,
Wow.
it was
That's
unlike
incredible.
anything I'd ever seen.
Amazing.
It's on
Amazing.
YouTube. You can find it on YouTube.
Oh, cool. Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So I see that that's a wholly different thing than if you're scrolling through social media and you find all these things are really exciting. Oh, that was great, but it's gone in 15 seconds or 30 seconds or something like that. This was something that you can go back and experience this as something holistic. I think that's what I found there.
Yeah. 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 Because that's the next thing. I mean, there's all kinds of science now about how when we are together in spaces with music, our heart rhythms sync. So it's called, synchrony.
Hmm.
And the musicians are syncing to each other.
Huh.
So, you watch a conductor and you say, is that really doing so much? Well, not really, because what's really happening is everybody in the orchestra, their heartbeats are in synchrony. And then that is happening with the stage and then the audience. So you get a togetherness that is just immense, right? And then of course, in the opera, you also have, I mean, the other thing about the opera, it has all those things, as I said, and then the real peak of it all is a singular voice, right? It's those
What does that mean?
moments where, well, I mean, so you've got like everything, all the things I just described. You have the visual, the tactile, the all the instruments, the tech, um, the people around you, right? All of this stuff. It's very often done in big spaces, so it's lots of people and energy. And then, but the thing that you wait for is the high note at the end of that aria, which is sung by one voice, And I think that this is also that thing, that weird thing that we all experience of being both small, in this universe. Like when we look up to that starry night and we're like, who the heck, I'm just this speck of dust or whatever it is. And yet the conscious experience that we have is that we are that one voice that travels through this world, you know? We are singular, and we are a part of this giant thing. And there's something about this art form that is, has everything, but then elevates the power of a singular voice in that space, that I think is really, really exceptional, and really speaking about what the human experience is. Because I mean, also that a voice gets elevated by everything around it, right? Um, and the fact that it's acoustic, there is no mic for that voice that comes soaring out. And so you feel that not just in your heartbeat, but you feel that in your bones. You feel that. I mean, I was in the opera not long ago at the very top of the gallery listening to a soprano that I actually got to study with. So I knew her personally, and she was singing Tosca, and she was singing a quiet note in the middle of her range. And I felt like, I was up there, not seat number 3025. I literally felt her voice inside my ear.
Hmm.
I mean, what goes on acoustically with all of our bones and pores and energies and chemistries in that space, with a voice that is using the body as its acoustic instrument. It's also really exceptional.
So, as a professional singer, professional opera singer, it still moves you like you're a child hearing it for the first time.
I mean, there's good shows, and not every show is,
But,
and that's also part of the fun,
you
right?
hear it here, you're like this woman singing like that. That's a transcendental experience.
Yeah,
You're
absolutely.
not just you're not thinking, well, that was she hit middle C, that was really good. Per-
Yeah,
you're not
no,
analyzing it. You're experiencing it.
no. I'm experiencing it, absolutely. And it's not always like that. You can go to and I get very dramatic about when I don't like something. And the
Uh,
older I get, the harder it is to sit through a production that I like. I feel more and more offended by things, um, because I have strong feelings about my art form, and what gets done to it, So I get sort of protective a little bit, and like if I feel like somebody's doing something to it that it doesn't deserve, then I get angry.
could it also
But yes, I absolutely, and that I experience very viscerally, very viscerally. And I don't, it's probably PG-13 here, but I have to say that, I feel the opera and the ballet. I was just at the ballet in my body. It's like you get this, this image that opera has, that it's a bunch of like white-haired people, like boring, 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 is so weird. Because when you're in it, when you know it and love it, it's highly like, it has a sexual power, it's so physical. And and this is, in a society that's also not having enough sex anymore. It's also a reason to check it out.
Get obsessed with it.
Right? I know, right? So we're obsessed with it, but we're not having it, you know? So go to the opera. You might be inspired in a different way. I mean, so much of the opera is about sex too. So
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
if we're being really honest.
Yeah, well, I think that's part of the human dimension, part of the human experience, and part
And
of
create.
why um, modern life is so difficult, is because
Mm,
those relationships don't. Um, like I'm thinking about Turandot, and
mm,
I don't know
mm,
the characters'
mm,
names, so you have to forgive me. But at the very end, the woman gives her life up for the guy.
mm. Yeah. Yeah.
She didn't do that out of some kind of rational political statement. She's not doing it for that. She's doing it because she actually
Mm,
loves him at such a deep level. It's more important for him
mm.
than for her to live.
Yeah. 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 And there you have that act, those acts of moral beauty. That's really interesting in the research on awe, and in aesthetic research that the thing that makes people, humans, experience awe on the deepest level are acts of moral beauty,
Hmm.
which very often are acts of self-sacrifice.
Totally.
When they see another human being sacrificing themselves for somebody or something, this is just like, and we have this is all over the opera. I mean, of course, as a feminist, I have to say it's very often the female that is getting sacrificed, which is not the best. We need some news stories too for the opera.
Sure.
But yes, this is big, and this sense of sacrifice is lost a little bit in our current culture, isn't it? Like like we all think we should just have everything all the time. And so when you really see somebody doing that, it's extremely moving. And they see that in brain research, that's the thing that makes a brain really go into high gear.
Um, it's so interesting that you're saying this because in the first chapter of my this novel I'm writing, I'm telling a story about a young man. I don't have to go on all that, but he and his brothers and sisters have ended up living with their grandparents because of the death of their parents. And open the story with a conversation that he's having with his grandfather, who's very old school, about a class that he's had in philosophy. And and the and this philosopher is basically saying that, well, I have a phrase for it. He says, his teacher says, there is no past nor future, only the now. All that once was considered in time has vanished into simulation. And so he's asking his grandfather what he thinks, and his grandfather doesn't want to say anything. And finally, he says um, that what he wants to know is what does his professor love, and what is that thing which is the professor is willing to sacrifice everything for in order to preserve it and protect it. And he says that
Mhm,
is what love
mhm,
is. And so the boy asked his grandfather, "What is it that you love?" And he says, "Your grandmother, our family, our friends." And he had been in military service all his life. He says, "But I don't love my country. I honor my country because I do
mhm,
not want to be in a position where I love that also requires me to kill."
mhm, mhm,
So I
mhm,
think this idea of love is really missing in a lot of
mhm,
this. And I see that as the kind of the point of conflict of most of these operas that I've watched. And granted, I've only watched them. I don't know the stories. I can't, I don't have the language to listen to it all and
mhm,
understand it. So it's that kind of thing which but it is clear to me that most of these opera composers are trying to speak to us about the nature of human love between us and one another, and the of romantic love, but not also of the love that we have for the places that we live.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, do you have? I mean, you've sung a lot of opera, so you have. Do you have your favorites that you love to go back to because they're saying they always say something to you that is um, continues to remind you of who you are? If that's clear. That may not be a clear question. Um, what are the operas that really speak to you about life and that you love to continue to kind of reflect upon and be a part of?
Um, that's really interesting. Because when I think about the pieces that I identify with about who it as to who I am, the ones that come up for me are not actually operas, but oratorios. So that's, I was just noticing that, and that's interesting. Um, so, but if I think about opera, I mean, what's been so wonderful for me was had one of these voices that I started as a light soprano, and I sang a lot of early music. So I really, got to know early music really well. And then I was a good musician because I had studied piano, so because I could read music and I had decent rhythm, I was asked all the time to do new music. So I was doing a lot of, contemporary music. And then as I got older, I suddenly the voice started to develop and get bigger. Not all voices do that. And so then I got to dive into this romantic repertoire. And that was really incredible. Because I kind of was on the intellectual side. The Baroque people are a little intellectual sometimes, and the contemporary people can be very intellectual. And so I was sort of identifying in that way for a while. And then suddenly I was, asked to sing Puccini and, things like Michele and Carmen but I guess the biggest thing was singing Puccini, since we're talking about Puccini today. You're talking about Turandot as well. And what blew my mind, oh, and that's interesting because you're talking about time. I think I talked about this in the last time we talked. What blew my mind about Puccini was that like everything just carried you, like the thing about Puccini is this canvas that he's made it felt to me like a magic carpet. It felt like all I had to do was experience it, feel it
Mhm.
and be with it, and I would be all right. Whereas, the Baroque stuff, there was a lot of coloratura, so you have to practice your technique. Mozart, exquisite music, exquisite characters. I mean, singing Mozart was amazing too, because for example, I sang all the roles, in certain operas, like I think I talked about it the last time, Don Giovanni, singing the young one and then, or the lighter one and then the middle one and all three. And then you're like, when you live inside those characters and you realize how different they are, right? Musically, Mozart made them so different. And so um, yeah, but Mozart is really hard technically. So you've really got to be like on the ball, with your voice and with your technique when you're singing Mozart. But when you get to play in Puccini land, there are other things that count, and that really being in the moment and letting yourself be carried. I mean, and he writes so many details in the score, you wouldn't imagine it.
Hmm.
The music is quite complex, even though it sounds like Hollywood. There's a lot of complexity in the music and so many details about how you should slow down, but just over these two bars. and then back to the tempo, and then, start again here, but make sure that it's the same tempo from before. I mean, it's full of notes and interesting directions that are absolutely, you must follow them, otherwise it won't work. But when you do that, it really is like, man, worlds open up. And I had that experience of feeling absolutely timeless. Like there's this timelessness in it. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. Hmm. So I would say, the later phase of getting to sing those romantic roles. But I still love Baroque music. When I was preparing, I was thinking a little bit about our conversation. And of course, one of the earliest opera composers, Monteverdi, also an incredible, um, mind and incredible wisdoms about human beings and relationship philosophy. There's philosophy all over Monteverdi. And the very first, most famous opera, Orfeo, about this great musical character, Orpheus. The opening scene starts with these incredible trumpets. They're so full of bombastic, like, here we are, and it's happening, and, ta-da! And then the first character, the scene opens with the character of music, the goddess herself, La Musica. And she says, hello, here I am, coming down from afar on high. I am music, and I wrote down the words here, who in I can't, in sweet sounds can make peaceful every troubled heart.
Hmm.
And so with love can I inflame the coldest minds.
Wow.
Singing with my golden lyre, I like to charm now and then mortal ears, and in such fashion that I make their souls aspire for the resounding harmony of the lyre of heaven.
If we're to hear that today, we're being reminded of something that maybe our world has lost. But back in his time, Monteverdi, is that what Monteverdi? Um, how,
Monteverdi, yeah,
how
yeah.
would
So
the
that's
audience,
early Baroque.
how would the audience have heard those sounds, those words, and how would they have responded to that? Would they say, "Oh, of course, this is the way it is," or "Oh, that is a reminder of something that I need to remember"? Is it more like that? Is that
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And the scientists all throughout history were total believers in music. You know, Pythagoras, this that who we know because of math, he had whole systems based on these ideas of harmonies and music, like for healing.
yeah?
Music of the spheres. People like Galileo, they really thought that the whole universe was built on music. And so at that time, I think that was like, oh, yes, here's music, the one who's representing what the universe is built upon. It's really different. You're right. And the next thing that we forget, because we're unfortunately almost all the time playing pieces that have been played many times over centuries, it was new, like at some point, nobody had heard those trumpets before. And then you were like, whoa, and or like thinking about a contemporary piece like Wozzeck, Alban Berg, the beginning of the 20th century.
Mhm.
I mean, when this music was played the first time, people were like, you know, like they had visceral, experiences sort of against it, like, and I heard this interlude that was famous. I heard it for the first time at the Staatsoper last year, and it blew my mind. And that's like, I know those harmonies are 100 years old now for me, and it's moving me, but you're absolutely right. Nowhere near what it was doing to the people who heard it the first time.
There's a Canadian scholar named Modest Eckstein, I think he originally came from one of the Baltic states. And he wrote a book called The Rites of Spring. It's about the cultural changes that were happening during or at the beginning of the First World War. And one of the things he writes about is the response to Stravinsky's The Rites of Spring, and when it was first played here in New York, and um, how the hatred for the piece was exhibited towards it because it was so different than, it wasn't Beethoven, it wasn't Brahms, it wasn't so,
Mm-hmm.
but it was so very different. And today we think of it as one of the great not classic, but one of the great pieces of modern
Yeah.
music because we're used to hearing it, and we've adapted. Our ear has been adapted to changes in all of that form. And
Yeah.
as a very traditional person, uh, um, the thing, and I've thought about this a lot over the years. As someone who's very traditional, I love Baroque music, I love Bach. I love all of that, but I also like um, the improvisation that John Coltrane does with his saxophone, and um, and so I think what I'm trying to say is that there's a such a multidimensional character to who we are as people that all these different forms of music have a capacity to touch us and to draw something out in us that would not be possible if we only listen to Bach. If we only listen to Bach, which would be great, it would be fine. But if the old line of what's your desert island choice, the one.
Hmm.
Well, if you had two choices, I would say it'd be Bach and Coltrane.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
you could listen to those two and you'd have the full range of the beauty of music for the rest of your life.
Yeah. And they have a lot in common. I mean, there's so much jazz about Bach, and lots of jazz players take him in to their music. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's amazing too. And so back to the question of time, I
Mhm.
mean, they sound like friends, Bach and Coltrane.
I came across something 2 days ago. 2 days ago? Yeah, Sunday. Um, a piece, an oratorio by Handel, late in his life, called The Triumph of Time and Truth.
Mm-hmm,
You
mm-hmm.
familiar with
Yeah.
this?
I've never sung it. I don't know it well, but I've heard of it.
I mean, it's like a 2.5 hour long oratorio. So it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
yeah, I've downloaded it. I'm gonna, as I travel over the next couple of weeks, I'm gonna listen to it, and I've copied off the lyrics and the libretto. So because I want to hear. I mean, what was that? 1700s.
Yeah.
I want to hear what they're talking about in the 18th century when they're talking about truth and time
Time and truth.
and its
Mm,
triumph. And I know that it has something to do with some something that took place in England in the 1740s. I'm not sure what
mm,
that is. I have to check that
mm.
out too. But you see that I think all these things have a way of weaving themselves into our lives and they become meaningful. And if we are willing to allow them to have effect upon us, but even more so if we allow ourselves to share that with other people who we don't know are going to appreciate it, I think we have the opportunity of opening up ways of talking to one another that we didn't have before.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a lot of what we're finding, in the work of really trying to say, hey, this isn't just you go to the opera because you're a fancy person, or, put it on a pedestal and say, how can we really hold this and use it? And people don't like to instrumentalize the arts, but the word instrument is in that word. So, I think that the arts are there for us to use, and they always have been. So I'm not one of those people who believes that art is just for art's sake. I think that's okay. There's a place for that, but there's real purpose, and there's so much to be taken out of these great works. And one of them is like finding ways to connect people to them, or to connect people to each other through them. And that works beautifully when you just have a piece, and ask people, just being in the space with people at an opera just gives you another connection. And if you are actually, or like these groups that I met in London, who are working with Shakespeare and young people, or working with veterans and with Shakespeare,
Mhm.
veterans finding themselves in these monologues about, dealing with tragedy, dealing with the ideation of self-harm, they find themselves in Shakespeare, and then they can sort of, stand up in a different way, and then they practice those monologues and learn how to perform them, and then it becomes a thing. I mean, this one group, she was even talking about veterans who were becoming working actors after having come to this group to do well-being, to heal trauma through the arts, going on and making that a real part of their lives. So there's so much richness in that. Absolutely. Yeah.
So for someone who has had no experience and no um, connection to anything that's operatic, what's your recommendation for where they start? But let me
Yeah, that's
explain why I'm asking that. Because
yeah.
um, I met some people back in the winter who were poets, and they inspired me to create a poets playlist from the Eddie Network podcast. And
Mm.
I'm interested in creating an operatic um, playlist of people that you're going to introduce me to who I can have conversations about opera I'm convinced that if more people listen to opera, the world would be a different place.
Mm. Mm.
And I'm not suggesting that opera should be treated therapeutically. And that's not what I'm
Yeah.
saying. I'm saying
Yeah.
we should immerse ourselves in the operatic form so that we might discover parts of our lives that are missing because we've found ourselves in too much of a hard shell analytical mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I
Where do
would
we
love to.
begin?
Where would you begin? I mean, I would love, if we could play a tune here, I would play, for example, this opening of Orfeo um from Monteverdi. It's not exciting, but if you look at the text, and you just as an introduction to the power of music, right? And I love that. Then also in Monteverdi, there's an incredible duet called Pur ti miro, and you'll find that all over the internet. And that's one of the sexiest opera duets ever written. Just gorgeous music. Pur ti miro. That's from Poppea. Um,
Well,
I guess,
I can add these. I'll find them on YouTube and
yeah, yeah. You could
send
have a
me the
look.
link to it, and then we'll.
Yeah. And then, you would, I mean, the next obvious thing would be something from Handel, if you don't mind too much Baroque music. But um, really great pieces in Handel. Like a really famous one is called Lascia ch'io pianga, Leave Me to Cry, and that's from Rinaldo. And that's something I can send you links if you want.
Yeah.
That's a gorgeous aria. And or something like Ombra Mai Fu. People love that. That's a beautiful piece. And that's something that people would recognize. Um, Mozart, you have to hear some Mozart. I love the Overture to Marriage of Figaro. I mean, you listen to it, and I taught teenagers for a while, and I felt like goal was to get them interested in classical music. And so I would do these sessions called imagination listening. And I would just bring a piece in and just ask them to listen and just, find out what came up. And when they listened to the Overture to Marriage of Figaro, they said, it sounds like a party. And I was like, yes, it's about, preparing a wedding. That's exactly right, And so and I actually use the Marriage of Figaro regularly when I try to get myself to do a cold dunk. This is one of my little secrets. It's my husband loves doing cold dunks and he's trying to get me into it. And I can only do it if I'm revved up and listening to the Marriage of Figaro because then the music takes over your brain and so you don't feel the pain.
Yeah.
So Marriage of Figaro, amazing. Yeah, of course, Queen of the Night from the Magic Flute. And yeah, there's so many good ensembles, my goodness. Um, I mean, something that just comes into my mind, something much more contemporary. Bernstein from Candide,
Mm.
Make Our Garden Grow. That's one of my favorite all-time ensembles. There's a wonderful ensemble
So
in
maybe what
Carmen.
I'll do is play one or two of those, but then create a list of links to all of those that you, and then that way,
Yeah.
if we had 5 or 10, then that way people have the option of being inspired by you and going and
Mhm.
listening to all of that. And then they can go scour the internet for more examples of this.
Yes, I would be thrilled. In fact, we're in the things that I'm working on over the next 6 to 8 months is creating a kind of an online course of, getting your feet wet, tipping your toes into the world of opera. And so it's something I've thought about a lot, and I think it's wonderful that you're considering
So
doing something like this.
when you're ready to launch that, then we'll bring you back.
Yeah, and we'll talk again. Great.
We'll celebrate that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so grateful to know you first, um, but even more so that your love of opera and your love of life and your love of people um, comes through in all of this, and I thank you for that. And I it matters. It matters to me, and I've you know, it. I mean, I'll say this to all of you who are watching. You do have to decide you're going to be uncomfortable with a music form that is not like what you've seen before. But once you have decided, I'm going to find myself in this somehow, then you're going to find that you love it and you're going to want more of it.
Mm. Yeah. It's Thank you. Thank you for your kindness and for that introduction and it reminds me of the very first interview I ever gave. I was, I think, 21 years old. It was for a local magazine in Baltimore because I'd won a little competition there. And I told the writer because they was like, opera's not for everybody. And I said, yeah, it's a little bit like beer, because I was a college student. It's the first time you drink it, you're like, doesn't taste that good. But eventually you learn to like it.
I think that's
And I do
true.
think that is absolutely, yeah. And exactly what you say, it has depth. It has a depth that I think we all intrinsically yearn for, especially now. And so it's a way to get deep. I mean, not always, it has so many levels. So you can use it, to take a cold dunk, or you can go deep. And that's the magic. Yeah, it has all those levels. Yeah, and it's, as La Musica says, it's inspiring us to aspire to remember about that music off in heaven somewhere.
Yeah, we definitely need to have her. That's the piece that we need to share with everyone. So
Just to start. Yeah.
it's been great. Thank
So great. Well, thank you so much for having me again. It's a pleasure to see you, to talk to you as always. And I'm
you.
so excited about your new project.
I am too. So
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Ed.
thank you, Jennifer, for being with me today to talk about opera and maybe encourage people to venture off into something that's unknown. And yet, if they spend a little time with it, find it is something that touches them and becomes something of real meaning for them. As I uh, as I travel around, I have a little thing in my car where I can put a little SD card, and I have an SD card of opera and poetry, really because of the experience of interviewing people here on the Eddie Network podcast. So I encourage you to go venture forth, try new things. Do not be afraid to not know what you're listening to, but spend a little time with it and allow it to kind of seep into your bones, as they say. Thank you for watching. Please hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment. Greatly appreciate that. And we'll see you next time here on the Eddie Network podcast. Bye bye.